Hello and welcome to an open source community hangout. Today we'll be working with the OpenCiviWiki project and reviewing some activities partially relating to the Hacktoberfest event. If you're not familiar, Hacktoberfest is a yearly event sponsored, I believe, by DigitalOcean, where people are encouraged to contribute to open source projects and rewarded for their efforts. It looks like there's two additional sponsors, Upright and Docker, who are coordinating Hacktoberfest 2022. The event is still ongoing, so if you'd like to participate, stop by hacktoberfest.com and read the participation guide. And they give you quick overview of steps you need to complete in order to participate and get a prize. The first 40,000 participants will get a choice of one of two prizes. We've gone through the Hacktoberfest step to register the CiviWiki project, so all of your CiviWiki contributions will count towards your Hacktoberfest participation. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and just read through a few active posts to make sure everything's moving forward. Last weekend, I created a bunch of issues and then stepped away for the weekend, and we had so much activity. We had a flurry of activity, and it was a bit overwhelming when I stepped back in to try to manage all those tasks. So I'm going to try to stay a little bit closer on the pulse here. So we've got a pull request from Apurva Kashyap. Apurva, please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. But I want to point out the effort here is really well done and pretty far along. We're just redoing the homepage, the CiviWiki homepage. When you're running the app, we have a static, more or less static homepage. And previously, all of the CiviWiki templates were created using Backbone. So there's some JavaScript logic that if we would disable Backbone, the homepage would look like this. It was broken. We're trying to remove Backbone from the project. So we want to recreate the original CiviWiki front page mostly, but also take the opportunity to make some improvements. So Apurva has gone above and beyond and has added some improvements as well as porting it over to static HTML. They've had to change 3 main files and quite a lot of lines of code in order to get this working. And I believe I've already gone through this review. I'm just going to check on a couple of the comments real quick. We want to add localization to the CiviWiki platform in order to make it useful to people in non-English speaking countries or places. So we need to make sure all of our UI texts have these translation tags on an ongoing basis. We're going to have localization rounds. And I believe, so you can see the number of lines of code is quite extensive. Those are my comments, and I think we've had a few additional comments. Well, I'm just going to kind of scroll fast. I see my name over and over here. Gorkum also, one of our core maintainers, also noticed there was some CSS here that's commented out. And as a general guideline, we try not to leave in code that has been commented out. Sometimes you're tempted to leave it in because you're like, well, maybe we'll use this in the future. Somebody took the time to build this. And that makes sense. You don't want to lose something that could be potentially useful. But I think that tendency more often leads to clutter and, in a way, confusion. Because when you have a bunch of stuff that's not really useful, it just blocks your view and makes it hard to see what is actually being used and what is actually useful. Also, we can retrieve these from the Git commit history. So this change here, if we remove these lines, is actually part of the Git history, we can see that that change was made and revert that if needed. So it's not really lost. It's just out of our line of sight. It's kind of like donating something to charity in a way. It kind of goes back into circulation, or I don't know. This is just my mindset on stuff in general. Keep things in circulation, and they'll come back to you if or when you need them. So we can, it's not really going to be in circulation, but it'll be in a Git history graph, so it's somewhere in there. We can get it when we need it. So I think that's it. Also add a new line. This is a lint thing. It's a little bit hard for me to see with the microphone there. It's a simple thing. It's a lint level thing, but for whatever reason, linters don't like this. I don't quite understand, but that's cool. They complain. There's some reason for it, and we will just also follow that guideline. Ideally, code reviewers wouldn't have to do that low level of a detail, the lint level detail. But for some reason, that is slipping through our continuous integration. Our tests are failing. Yeah, we'll have to come back to that. I'm not sure if this change is causing that failure. The views. Anyway, we won't be too strict on this one. Oops, I should have actually asked it to rerun that job. Oh man, it jumps way down there. Rerun. Failed jobs. Let's see if that is still an issue. I think we've resolved those. Okay, well, we're spending a bit of time on this pull request. Let's move to the next. So create a functional landing page. I'm just going to mark that as done for now. I visited it and we'll revisit it later. This is I think a pretty big one. Okay, and Gorkam's already handled that. I'll just make the assignment if it's not already done. There we go. All right, so nothing needed there. Rocket ship. And basically, the task, we're trying to move away from backbone templates to just using Django template syntax. Our core app has a bunch of, it has all of our JavaScript, all of our backbone view models, but there's also some templates in there that are using their own backbone view model. So it's kind of tricky to pick that out. But Daida, thank you for offering your help here, and we're able to support you in this task. I know it's not a trivial one. These have been a long-standing issue in the project, but once we get these ported over to standard Django template syntax, the project will be a lot healthier. Django has a really excellent documentation, very conventional, fairly well known and familiar to most, well, Django developers at least, but even web developers who are comfortable with HTML and maybe templating languages like handlebars or mustache or whatever the similar, can't recall exactly, but it's just really light templating syntax and it's well documented. That'll allow us to move forward, make improvements, fix bugs faster, and add new features. So thank you again, Daida, for taking up this issue. Oops. And then just let me just mention their name. Why is that? Taking on this task. Oh, I see. Yeah. Taking on this task. All right. Grammar. Taking this task would also seem grammatical to me, but I don't know. I'm an English speaker and I don't know English grammar. English is not an easy language. Okay. So basically, there's not much intervention from my standpoint. Gorkam has handled things. This is really nice. So we have to have a few active maintainers on these projects in order so no one person gets burnt out. And previously the project has lost all the maintainers, including myself, for a while. So we're trying to step back in and bring it back to life. Okay, and this is a pull request from, I believe, Dieter Michel. We're using the poetry for managing our Python dependencies, which is just kind of an enhancement over pip, the pip workflow. It adds some features that pip doesn't currently have, and for a while didn't have, but has subsequently gained. One of which is called a constraint solver. Basically, when you have a bunch of dependencies that have interrelationships, it can be very difficult to figure out which versions of the dependencies and their interrelated dependencies or sub-dependencies are compatible with one another, which ones will work together and which ones won't. To solve that, as a human standpoint, it's very challenging. You have to read through the dependency graph and find out, I don't know how to really do it. We don't want to actually get down to that level. So a constraint solver is what does that for you with a single command. I think pip has recently got that feature. Poetry also adds some developer experience improvements. So nonetheless, we're adding, we've been using poetry recently on this project. And since it's part of our continuous integration workflow, it needs to be sort of installed as one of the steps here each time. And that installation is taking 20 seconds on the develop branch right now. So we'd like to be more resource efficient for many reasons, including the fact that every CPU second is taking energy, and that's having an effect on the planet, right? So in all endeavors in life, we should try to become more energy efficient. There could also be a financial cost to this project, but as well as Microsoft and GitHub for that energy and the CPU expenditure. We're not being charged currently, but we don't want to exceed our continuous integration allotment. I don't know how much it is, or we haven't bumped up into that problem yet. But we'd rather use our CPU time for the critical tasks of like running tests and such. So with things like poetry and our Python dependencies that don't change as often, we don't want to keep reinstalling those when they haven't changed. It's wasteful. So what this does is we've previously cached our Python dependencies, but this adds a little bit of caching for the poetry installation process. Now check this out. We went from like approximately 20 seconds, maybe on average, it depends, let's just say 20 seconds, down to 1 second for loading and 3 seconds. So 4 seconds total, because loading out of that cache is pretty quick, but then there are a couple steps after you sort of install poetry at a system level. It runs a couple commands to configure it, you could say. So it's an install/configure step. And this says, okay, poetry is already installed because it got loaded from the cache. And now we're going to configure the settings. Done. And so we went down quite a bit. Like I said, 20 seconds down to around 4 seconds. If we update our dependencies or the poetry version, these will run again, but only at the time that they're updated. So overall, this is a pretty big savings, because not only is it just that one time we saw the difference, but it's every time, essentially every commit, it's running that CI pipeline. Now there's ways of, you can make a bunch of commits locally and then push all at once, and it'll only run the CI pipeline on that latest commit. So there's ways of avoiding that, but essentially this is quite a big savings, because then it also runs on our main branch or our develop branch, the CI pipeline. So this is good. If you're curious about how to do this, let's take a look at the code. So in our main workflow, we'll just take a quick look at this. This is useful for many projects, and this workflow you can kind of port over to your project directly. Let's view the file itself from top to bottom. So this is running several steps. It's not a huge file, so I can probably skim through it. We call it our continuous integration workflow. It's checking out activity on our develop branch, specifically pull requests, and any push to, I guess, any branch, it'll run it also. Not sure what workflow dispatch does in the CI pipeline, but there it is. The pipeline consists of several jobs. We have a tests job, which is basically the bulk of the work. could be named probably differently, but the job has several steps. First, we have to get the code into the running environment, the GitHub Actions environment. So we check out the repository, and then it's a Python project, so we set that up. This is pretty boilerplate. We're running pretty close to the latest version of Python, greater than 3.9. Then we want to see if we've installed Poetry before. So this is a cache action that looks for basically in the local environment, which since we're using Ubuntu and derivatives or Debian derivatives, Linux I think also generally would follow this. The user home directory locals .local. So we're getting we're constructing a cache key here basically, and we're seeing if that if there's a file matching this cache key. So trying to be unique, the OS, and we're hashing the main YAML, which is this file, to see if it's changed. So that's interesting. I would think it would want to hash the pyproject.toml. So maybe that's a mistake. I'm going to ask about that. Now, I'm admittedly confused here. I've not done this before, but I believe this, if we look at this main YAML, there's not really a place where the Poetry version is defined. So we're getting the hash of this file, like all the content has like a raw hash, a unique hash. And we're combining that with the operating system. So it's a unique thing prefix with the operating system. Even the hash, I think, should be unique enough, but I guess we're also potentially going to run this CI pipeline on other operating systems. So we would want the combination of the operating system and that file. But yeah, I believe if we look here at our pyproject.toml, we'll see that Poetry doesn't even change there, to be honest. Poetry core. Well, no, that wouldn't be a good one. Yeah, I'll have to think more about this, but we have to have something that'll change when we want to install a new version of Poetry. And there's like a file for that. Well, poetry.log. Where is it here? Two of two. Oh, I see. No. Where's the second one? What the heck? Very end. This is down here. Hmm. What am I missing? Some hidden text. What I think we're going to have to do is add a file to tell poetry. The version of poetry, not dependency, but the actual poetry configuration. Hmm. Because just for further, just to think aloud, what I think is this will only ever get a new version of poetry when this main workflow changes. And, it might be that we never really have, we don't have very, we don't change this very often. We could be like, yeah, this workflow is great. And we could use that for months or potentially years. And meanwhile, poetry could be releasing new versions. But since our workflow is not changing, then the hash won't change. This workflow text. My bad. Okay, we're specifying version here. So that's the key. That's what I missed, didn't I? Never mind. Specifically. Oh man, I cannot type. So I'll resolve it. Good. Reading is difficult. And that's why we, again, as I mentioned earlier, want to have less to read. That way you can see things a lot easier. But even then, there's not a whole lot to read here. From here to here, there wasn't many lines, but I just wasn't paying attention. So yeah, we'll be bumping the version of poetry here, which will mean that this main YAML has changed, which will cause the new version of poetry to install. Perfect, great. All right, so that's it. Now I figured out my own question, which wasn't visible here, by the way. So anyway, I'm just apologizing for myself, or giving myself an excuse. But yeah, that's the key line that causes, among other lines. Any line that changes will cause this hash to be different. But this is the one that we're mainly concerned about with poetry, but it doesn't matter that this poetry is installed when other lines change, because it happens so infrequently. Once we get this CI pipeline up and running, we shouldn't have to change it very often. Cool. All right. Overall, I think this is good. So you can see my thought process and the general process that goes into reviewing things. I'll approve this, and they have mentioned the related issue. So when we merge this, it'll fix issue 1383. We'll approve and merge, which again will save us CI time. It'll save resources, energy usage, which even if the energy is net neutral or whatever, I just think less is more. We want to really be resource efficient. That is also this tendency, I forget the name of the paradox or whatever it is, but when you increase efficiency, consumption tends to increase. For example, you make automobiles more fuel efficient, well, people will buy more fuel because now they can travel more. I hope that we're not going to be in that kind of situation, and that overall we're able to reduce our carbon footprint and energy usage, as well as any financial burden on the CiviWiki project in the future. So thank you, Dieter Michelle. Let me make sure that you got credit for, this is kind of an info one. Even though we're not managing this sort of infrastructure, it's an infrastructure definition, you could say, a continuous integration definition. We use these all contributors to recognize all contributors, not just the ones who push code. The code pushes are the easiest to recognize because it's kind of part of the Git history, the commit history graph, and things like that. And so everything is geared towards code. But really, there are so many ways to contribute. And honestly, there are even more important ways than code. Code is important because it makes the software happen, but a lot of life's challenges are solved more like in ways that code can't, like community development and being friendly and helping one another and coming up with ideas and solutions. So CiviWiki is an example of a tool that's intended to help solve problems that code can't necessarily. It's helping people to engage with big problems in life and political or otherwise, come together with ideas, shape those ideas together, discuss and debate constructively, and make change, hopefully, ultimately. But in order for any of that to happen through CiviWiki, we have to write some software. And right now, our software is not stable enough to promote any kind of any of those activities. But with the help of people like Dieter, we're making our development process and code more stable. So thanks again, Dieter. Let's approve this all contributors pull request. And essentially what all contributors does is sets a little data dictionary here for each contributor and with some information and what types of contributions that they made. The name would be your display name. Avatar is your GitHub profile picture. And then your profile URL can be your GitHub profile by default, but also like LinkedIn or your personal webpage, anything you set up as your GitHub profile homepage, I think. And then it adds a little line or a row to a big table of contributors, while also incrementing a number if there's a new contributor. In this case, Dieter had all previously contributed to our documentation and now infrastructure. So we'll approve that, and we'll take a look at our all contributors before recapping and signing off. Very cool, merged. So how it looks, we have our project source code contains a README file, and the README file contains some overview of the project and how to get involved, how to support us, where to hang out and chat with us, or how to bring up your ideas and such like that. Some developer relating things. This is again how you can get involved with the community. Then an overview of CiviWiki. We want to promote the community first and then the project. In a way, that's how this is organized, and how to contribute more specifically like bugs and ideas and code. Then we have this section with all of these people who have contributed, so many, 93 as of this live stream. 93 people have contributed everything from code, bug reports, project management, infrastructure, so many ways, discussions, I think I mentioned documentation, finding funding, financial management. There's a lot of ways. And all these are equally valid and important, but GitHub doesn't quite capture some of these types of contributions running tests. So yes, thank you to all of the 93 contributors and those who have most recently contributed today. So yeah, let's do a quick recap. Today's session was pretty brief. Oops, that was actually, leave that up, close this. There's that. I'm just gonna get things lined up and check the notifications page real quick again, because that will remind me. Nope, I did those. Okay. Remind me mainly of where I'm active. This one, I think that was it. And can I sort these by recent activity? Yeah, so we'll just go through. Okay. Hello, and welcome to a recap of today's open source community hangout. We've been working on the CiviWiki project today. You can stop by github.com/CiviWiki to find where we are developing this open source software and get involved with our community on the discussions or on our online chat. This month is Hacktoberfest 2022. All the contributors who are active on GitHub or GitLab today, this month can qualify as participants of Hacktoberfest. There's a few steps in order to participate. Read through the values and set up your profile and find a project and an issue to contribute. The issues don't have to be code. Our project recognizes all types of contributions in addition to code. So if you have an idea or a design that you'd like to share, there's ways we can acknowledge those contributions that should qualify for this Hacktoberfest, even though it's kind of oriented towards code contributions. The first 40,000 participants can have a choice between one of two prizes, a tree planted in their name or a Hacktoberfest 2022 t-shirt. So again, all of your efforts, contributions to CiviWiki during this month can and should qualify for this Hacktoberfest. We've already gone through the steps to mark the CiviWiki project as a participant in Hacktoberfest. Today, worked through a few small issues. I wanted to just keep on the pulse of the project so we don't get a big list of questions, comments, and pull requests like I did last weekend, where it was a bit overwhelming. And people were also waiting for their work to be complete or acknowledged or their question to be answered or all these things. So it's kind of not fair for the contributor. We need to have active maintainers here. So I'm trying to fill that role along. So we'll look at an issue of, which is actually a big one, porting our core templates to Django template syntax. The problem we're trying to solve is a lot of our templates were written in Backbone.js, and we're moving away from having a sort of a server client architecture where you have a JavaScript client making API calls to a server. That architecture was a bit heavy for this project and community. We needed to simplify down to a more sustainable project scope, including features, but also the architecture is a big problem. So the core of our app is essentially some the default templates like error pages and things like that that aren't feature or app specific. So in other words, Django is consists of like a Django project, and the project has one or more apps, which are bundles of features and tables and things, database tables and things like that. So our core app is essentially the default place where settings and maybe the home page, there's a few things I don't recall off the top of my head, but nonetheless, there's some backbone in there, and we need to port those over to Django template syntax and remove our main dependencies on JavaScript. The project doesn't need a lot of JavaScript right now, particularly any libraries or frameworks. If we do add JavaScript, it'll be small and hopefully vanilla. So we've got Daida, who has agreed to take this task, and Gorkum, the project co-maintainer and one of the lead developers, has responded. And I just also mentioned that I'm available to help with questions and difficulties. We want to make sure that any contributor is supported in their work. Okay, so that's issue number 1405 that was taken, and any work Daida does contribute, we will make sure it's split out in a way that qualifies for Hacktoberfest, even if the work continues beyond Hacktoberfest, because these issues are actually kind of challenging. Okay, create a view to show a list of all followed users. Essentially, we have functionality that lets you say, hey, that user is interesting. I want to follow their activity and get updates whenever, or at least be able to get back to that user. It's like a bookmarking feature more than a follow feature, I think. In any case, following would be a lot more complicated than our software currently provides. We've got Karan Agarwal has agreed to take this task. Had a couple of questions about specifically where to put the followers or following. It's a bit confusing, I understand. Followers would be people who are following me, and following is people I'm following. And this task involves people I'm following. They also had an issue with their session, and it was probably because we changed secret key recently, which Gorkum was able to help clarify, and then I was able to help Karan with their other question. So again, we're trying to make sure that people feel supported with their work too in contributing to CBWiki. This issue continues. We have another continuing issue. Our homepage or our landing page had some Backbone.js. It really didn't need to. It's largely a static page with a couple of call to action buttons and an embedded video. But when we would try to render the homepage without Backbone, it looked like this. And it's just an example of just excessive JavaScript. For a static page, it's not really necessary. It adds bloat and complexity, and it also just slows down our development process. So we want to kind of preserve the look and feel of the homepage, which when rendered with Backbone looked like this, and it's very elegant, and the content is the most important part, but at the same time just being based on HTML, CSS. Maybe a sprinkle of JavaScript here and there, vanilla JavaScript ideally. So yeah, Apurva Kashyap has taken this issue and they've made considerable progress. You can see here they've preserved the content, aesthetic, and made some small improvements, changing the image here as an example. I've reviewed this. There was just some small suggestions that we would like to include. The previous template did have, I think, localization and or internationalization, meaning we can mark template texts that the user would see as translatable, and then have rounds where we have people who speak various languages translate those or localize those. So in order to do that, since we're using Django template syntax, we just need to add the correct template tags. And I basically went through all of the markup and added those template tags in a way that can be easily committed directly without any other real effort. So it's in a way I'm kind of saying, here's how to do it. If you just accept this change, you can commit it directly without having to lift a finger. You just click a button, basically. Similarly, I'm just going to scroll past my comments, and they're all about the same thing, pretty much. Gorkum has noticed there was some code that had been commented out, perhaps as part of this pull request, or even just old crufty code that's been around. And we have the sort of mentality about decluttering and keeping the place clean. And while it can be tempting to say, this code took some time to write, it may be useful, it had served a function in the past, I want to keep it around, it actually makes it hard to review code when there's big block comments and things like that. And overall, this CSS gets shipped to the client, so it's also wasteful, wasting bandwidth in this case. Not very much, but nonetheless, we just want to remove it. So Gorkum pointed out a few lines of commented out code, and also applied these diff comments, which says if you just apply this commit, it'll fix the issue that I'm pointing out. And then, yeah, this is an important one. We don't, Gorkum and I and other reviewers don't want to have to sort of point out lint. It's really mind-numbing. And we have linters or beautifiers that will actually format a whole document for you so that the human reviewer can do stuff that the human reviewer is needed for, like finding even commented out code actually can be identified by some lint tools. But finding obvious bugs or confusingly written code, that's what a computer can't do, and you need a human in the loop. But here's an example of a lint level detail where at the end of this file, there's no new line, and that's a common convention to have one blank line at the end of a file. And so I had to take my time to point that out, where a linter would have just fixed it, basically. Nonetheless, these are not big deals, and we can kindly include those in our pull request review. So thanks to Portava, this is really great work. Overall, it looks great. There's just the things we're pointing out, again, are really low-level details, linting, or cleaning, housekeeping related stuff. So it's not any fundamental criticism of the overall approach. Thanks again for your contribution, and we'll try to get this merged in during Hacktoberfest. This is the issue. And finally, this is actually a pretty cool change in the vein of reducing our footprint, our resource consumption and carbon footprint as a result, as well as financially, any financial burden. What happens is every time you commit to this project, we have this pipeline that runs called a continuous integration pipeline that runs some checks on our code. We call it CI workflow here. That's the name we've put to it. And then sort of the job is to run some tests against our Python code. These tests include sort of like unit tests of all of our, well, not all, but increasingly our crucial application logic. We're going to add more test coverage. But they also run things like linting and potentially other tasks that are low-level details for housekeeping purposes. And right now, this CI pipeline has, a big task to run all the tests, which that's just going to take as much time as it does. We might be able to optimize those in some way, but it also has a task where we're essentially installing the installer. Our project is using the Poetry package manager, which is a package manager for Python dependencies. Without getting too much into it, it's just a way of defining what your ingredients of your project are and keeping them fresh. And in order to install that package manager, it's taking here around 20 seconds, let's just say, for simplicity. And then Poetry is used to install these dependencies. Now, previously, this step for installing dependencies could take, 30 seconds to a minute. But what we did is we cached the result of the step here whenever the dependencies are the same. In other words, if the ingredients are the same, we're not going to, the ingredients are the same and the versions are the same. We're not going to reinstall those because they're still, the shelf life is still fresh in our analogy there. So we go from a minute down to 0 seconds because of caching, to 4 seconds. It takes a little bit of time to load the cache, which is kind of big. So we were thinking, let's also see if we can shave off a little bit of time from this Poetry installation step by caching it. And this, since it's the first time that's run, this step took 0 seconds because it didn't find any cache, but then it installs it. So let's take a look at this pull request, because in this comment is an example by Dieter of the difference when Poetry is cached. The loading of Poetry takes 1 second from a cache hit. So we can see here that it did find it, and it's this many bytes, 25 megabytes, which is actually pretty considerable. So that's 25 megabytes of files that we didn't need to pull from the internet and configure, which is a bandwidth resource savings, as well as CPU savings of moving those files into the right locations on the disk. So we can just restore that using the unique identifier. And then we still need to spend a little bit of time with Poetry installation. We can see that Poetry says, oh, I'm already installed, so I don't need to call to the server and get those files and put them in the right place, right? It's already done over here. But it has a little bit of a configuration it needs to do. So we still need to have this step to make sure that the Poetry, executable or binary file is available for the subsequent steps if it's needed, which since it's cached again, it's not needed. And so what we're doing is we're saving off time and CPU resources and saving the planet a little bit at a time. I know it's kind of silly, but these steps take real energy and real resources to complete. And oftentimes when we're not paying for those resources, since we're getting this from GitHub, it's really easy to just say, yeah, we'll do everything. We don't really care about efficiency. But so this actually saves around 16 seconds and all the compute time and bandwidth that come along with that. So yeah, we just merged this. It was a great work, very timely. Let me see. Oh, refresh. There it is. It's merged. Yeah. Let's just take a quick look at the code. I know I've been going a little bit long on this, but view the file. If you're working on a project on GitHub and you want to use Github Actions for your continuous integration workflow, here's ours, and you can borrow from this as much as you like. We name it continuous integration workflow. It's going to, when we open a pull request against the develop branch, it's going to run all these steps as well as any push to other branches. We call this generally the Python tests job, and the job consists of several steps. We need to check out the repository, so we have the code ready. We're a Python project, so we need to set up Python, which should have an uppercase P. These are just prefab actions, and we specify our Python version. Then here's the new addition. We're going to see if there is a file in our local cache that matches this key. It starts with .local, then it joins the operating system version, which we're running these on Ubuntu, I think it said, but we potentially could run these on other operating systems, so we need to include that in the file name. Otherwise, we might try to run look for a cached Mac OS X file on an Ubuntu environment, and those wouldn't work. Although we're only running, again, Ubuntu, so this is a little bit extra. And what it does is then hashes this file main.yaml, which is the file I'm reading here. So GitHub workflow main.yaml. And this is useful because the contents of this file, anytime this file is changed, it'll basically cache poetry again, which includes the next step. If we install poetry here, we might bump the version to a new poetry version, which would change the contents of this file and cause the hash to be different, which would in turn trigger a new cache invalidation, basically, and then it would do its job and cache it, and on subsequent runs, then this step would be skipped. So it's really a clever way that Dieter defined this. And that's about it. So we install poetry and install the cache dependencies, and again, or check if they're cached. We're using a similar approach. In this case, our poetry.lock is the manifest that has all the exact versions of all of our dependencies and their relationships and their own hashes. So anytime that changes, we will recache all the versions so that we don't have to reinstall them on subsequent runs. If there's no cache hit, then we'll install them. But if there is cache, then we'll just use it. Pretty cool, saving resources. After that, we do some regular Django stuff. We're running migrations and collecting static files. So everything up here is pretty Python specific, poetry specific. Here is Django specific. And this we're using Flake 8, and we've got black formatting our code locally. So we're making sure the code passes lint checks. So yeah, this is a fairly Python poetry specific CI workflow, but feel free to grab any of those changes that are relevant to your project. All right, well, this has been another open source community hangout. Again, stop by github.com/CiviWiki to get involved with the project, and make sure to register with Hacktoberfest or follow their participation guidelines so that any of your contributions here can credit towards your Hacktoberfest participation. Thanks again for your time. Have a great day, and I hope you're doing well.